Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar video. This is going to be my Korra commentary track, fan commentary track, and this one's going to be for Book 3 Change, Episode 9 The Stakeout. So I'll reveal here what the next two commentary tracks after this are going to be, but again continue to submit episodes that you want done in this series yourself, both from Avatar and from Korra. So the next one that you're going to see after this is going to be for 302 The Headband from Avatar. Then I'm going to go back over to Korra and do K402 Korra alone, and then we'll see what people are saying, what other episodes they've suggested. Again, there's still other suggestions that are in. I just want to give chance for some other suggestions to come in also. So yeah, if you want to sync up your copy of the episode with this commentary track, obviously get your copy of the episode ready, whether that be DVD, Blu-ray, or online stream. What's going to happen is that I'm going to stop speaking as part of this introduction to the video. There's going to be about a 10-second pause with no audio, and then when I start speaking again, that's when I'm hitting play on my version of the episode. It's when you should hit play, and if we do that correctly, you should be synced up with me within a second or two, and so it should be the best way to use this commentary track. So that's what it is. Make sure you have your episode ready to go. I'm going to stop speaking now, hit play when I start speaking again. Okay, so here we are with my first Korra commentary track of this series, and I'm going to be doing Book 3 Change, Episode 9, The Stakeout. A few people suggested this one. I think this, of the Red Lotus sort of centric episodes, is definitely one of the better ones from Book 3. If you haven't, seen my other videos where I've talked about Book 3 before, you'll probably know that Book 3 is my personal weakest book of Korra, and I always have found the Red Lotus to be very underdeveloped as villains. So it's sort of fitting that this is the first Korra commentary I'm doing, in that this is the episode where we basically learn everything we're going to learn about the Red Lotus in Book 3. The conversation Korra and Zahir have at the end of the episode is basically the only proper information dump on the Red Lotus in the entire series. I just feel it falls short and is nowhere near what it needs to be. But this opening section, I think, is at least fun in that you get to see the Team Avatar, working together here on the mission. I just don't think it's that interesting of a mission. My problem with the Terror Within, the previous episode, and my problem with the first section of this episode is just that I don't find the whole Ai Wei was a traitor in Zaofu plot to be very interesting. And so we focus on him for effectively a whole episode across two episodes, all to get to the idea that, oh, Zahir just kills him immediately. It will result in Ai Wei's death. But yeah, interesting that the wanted posters are out there for everyone. And it's at this point you realize that, yeah, over the course of the first two seasons, all of the characters have been arrested at one point or another, whether it be in Book 1 or Book 2, and that's just the way it's gone. So it's very interesting. Obviously, Tarlok had the entirety of Team Avatar arrested. Korra got herself arrested in the first episode, so it makes sense. We're obviously post the kind of old wounds stuff, so Sue and Lin are on better terms, but they still have their sisterly dynamic where Lin is the more serious one and Sue is the more one willing to do adventurous things like sending the team out to go after Ai Wei. But yeah, I do like that the episode is set in the Misty Palms Oasis. It's a great reference back to Avatar, of course, when we went there. But yeah. Naga just wants a treat. It's a nice interaction. Avatar's always done characterizing the animals very well. They're not just purely there to be some level of transport, that they get characterization on their own. So Naga wanting a treat, they're on friendly terms, so Naga's kind of willing to do that because Korra's close. But anyway, And obviously, like, Bolin's interest in police work here I suppose it's kind of a setup for his position in Turf Wars, where he becomes a police officer for at least a little bit. But obviously, this is very much sort of Nooktuk style Bolin here, coming up with these plots and stuff like that. And it's interesting that this happens in an episode where the whole Nooktuk history with Bolin comes up quite heavily. Yeah, that's a great line from Mako. But I like that Mako's just like straight in, this is what we're going to do. I'm a cop, I know to stake the place out, we'll stay undercover. I like the spirits just being around here, like the Misty Palms Oasis. It's cool to just see them part of the world again. Again, I feel book 3 didn't really touch on this that much, given that it was the book that happened after book 2. I still ultimately feel it's just something in general that Korra hasn't explored all that much, the fact that spirits are in the world and that this is what needs to be resolved. Turf Wars attempted to touch on the idea, but it really didn't commit to anything and just sort of spun its wheels once more. But it still remains I think the major thing that Korra as the Avatar post book 4 needs to deal with. And so yeah, they find out Aiwei was here. The guy's tattoo is sort of interesting in that, like, okay, it's not the same sort of style exactly as Gazan, but the same sort of color. So, like, is there any similarity there? But again, they don't really, like with most of the things with the Red Lotus, they don't explain it. So we don't know what Gazan's tattoos are about. Mention of Jaibao's Grove, a location in the spirit world. But we'll get that later on. A lot of that will be explained in the conversation with Zahir. Obviously, it's not on any actual map. And I love the tease here of, like, Korra figures this out later, but the idea is that the spirits were coming over to basically say, it's not in this world. That location is a place in the spirit world. Nice reference. And yeah, I think you have so much potential with spirits being in the world. I just really think they were used, but not really that much in this book, which is sort of unfortunate. Like, Zahir references, obviously, like, the kind of decision Korra makes, like, in book 2, in their conversation, but it's never really focused on that much. And I like how they set up that those are like bounty hunters, but they're not really. They're hunters, but a different type of hunter. Autograph hunters. So yeah, there's Aiwei. Such an interesting decision to just have them both wear like bright yellow ponchos. And so this is where the stakeout is actually going to happen. And I like that Mako immediately is just like, no, like, I know, Korra, that's your style of doing things, but we can't do that this time. Now, ultimately, she still goes ahead and ultimately does that. Mako is maybe a little too cautious in the end, but it was the correct decision to actually just do some staking out first. The kind of Korra alone spirits. I just want to see them there, outside. And yeah, what seems to be the first conflict of the episode ends up being what gets them the room in the inn. Nooktuk fans. So yeah, Lily and Macau here. And like, Bolin is such an interesting character at the end of the series, and even what they're doing with him in the comics, he's had so many different like roles and jobs, but they seem to be still going with this plot of like, he still doesn't know exactly what he wants to do. There's a slight tease that like he wants to maybe go into politics, but like they haven't really committed to it yet. But at least they do a lot of stuff with him. Definitely of the main team Avatar members, I think Korra and Bolin are the ones who get the most development in Legend of Korra. Mako and Asami both unfortunately get really pushed to the side after sort of strong first books and aspects of book 2, but really apart from like a handful of moments in book 3 and 4, they're really sideline players in a way. So yeah, just like how cramped the room is. And yeah, here is, he finds the Pai Sho board, which is great, like just to see the game being mentioned again, that it's still a thing, it's still important, lots of people know how to play. Street Pai Sho from Shady Shin, that's a nice reference. And yeah, like in these books, especially like what is it, book 2 and 3 are the main books that like Asami doesn't really have a lot to do, and so you mainly have to rely on her mentioning her father in a few situations like this, of like, oh, my father taught me how to play Pai Sho and he was like a master evil genius, and they don't get too much into it, there's not a lot of depth, but at least it's something. But it is also one of the only actual character traits that kind of Asami has at this point, is to constantly mention her father and the fact that he's kind of in prison at this point. The different approaches to Pai Sho, fast-paced versus slow and steady. And yeah, the actual classification of the game is both. Over 10,000 years, so kind of pre-1. And yeah, this is basically, there will never be an official version of Pai Sho because not even the show has an official version of the game. Like it's such a tragedy that there never has been like an official release of the game of Pai Sho. There's been so many fan versions, but like ultimately I don't think we actually know how the game is exactly played. They really should do it, but if they don't know in the show, as evidenced by lines like this, what are they meant to do? And yeah, they're sort of linking in the Pai Sho philosophies with just general philosophy, which makes sense. And yeah, establishing Asami is better at the game than Bolin, and they play a bunch of different times. I do think they spend a little bit too much time on this section when like there's nothing actually happening in the stakeout, so it's just the team just like being there in the room. And Korra always has this thing of like, you need to be fast paced because you have so few episodes per season. Each season has a pretty big plot of its own, that like anytime you're not directly addressing the plot, it feels like this time could be better used elsewhere. And it's stuff like this in this episode that you feel like, could you not cut this down a little bit to give more time for Zahir and Korra to talk later on, to give more information and depth about the stuff that's really, really important. Mako has a logbook. But yeah, there comes a point at which like he hasn't moved in so long that like, Korra makes the right decision to like go ahead with this, and that like none of them are ultimately thinking about anything spiritual here, but then it's something like, oh, you have to consider that stuff like this might be the case. So he's meditated into the spirit world. And this is when Korra figures out the moment from earlier on. It's in the spirit world. And you appreciate in Korra just their willingness to do this at times. Like after you've had a book called Spirits, that now the spirit world is just a place you can go to. It's not this crazy mysterious place that constantly needs to just be a mystery forever. Korra can meditate there. The portals allow you to go there. It's another world, but it's another aspect of the Avatar universe that you can just go into and stuff can happen in. And so that's what we get here, Zahir and Aiwei talking here. But again, this is also where it's really highlighted that this whole pursuit of Aiwei was kind of pointless in a way, in terms of focusing on him, because he's just utterly dismissed as a character here. A loose end. That's all Zahir sees him as. And yeah, it just highlights how spiritual Zahir is. He knows all these ways to sort of... He's in such control of himself in the spirit world. He can, like, go where he needs to do. Just chuck Aiwei into the fog of lost souls, and he's done for. So that's the death of Aiwei, basically, because he's not going to get out. His body's just going to die. He's effectively killed in this moment. Nice shot of Zahir there. And I do like this scene in general, just the idea of, like, hero and villain finally interacting, finally getting a chance to talk. They can't actually fight each other here. And he's willing to talk because secretly he is sending the rest of his group after her. Because he knows where she is, because they followed Aiwei. It's well constructed in that sense. Needs more depth, though. Okay, so they're the Red Lotus. And of course they make the connection to the White Lotus here. This is a lot of telling us instead of showing us. In that, like, the White Lotus are just kind of have disappeared from the story at this point. Like, the Red Lotus White Lotus rivalry is just not a factor in Book 3 at this point. Like, Xiaobai is really interesting in the concept, but who is he? Like, what is the real issue between the Red Lotus? Is it just that they went public? The White Lotus went public? That's, I think, some of the frustration here. So this is where he tells the rest of them, Poli's going to stay with Zahir, and she sends Ghazan and Minghua to the Misty Palms Oasis. You arguably learn more about Unalaq through this conversation than anything. Like, that is the perspective that Unalaq had on Wan as well, which is the same that Zahir has because they're part of the same organization. Again, it's not really a nuanced discussion of Wan because Wan was correct at the time, but now it's time to change it. So it's kind of a bit pointless to be overly critical 10,000 years later, given that the situation was different. Again, interesting concept of, like, if we trained you, you could have been brilliant, and you could have been this kind of pseudo dark avatar. Interesting idea, and it gives context for, like, okay, this is why they tried to take her from before, but show us some of that. Show us that fight that happened in the past of, like, the Red Lotus attacking and her being defended by Tonraq, Tenzin, Zuko, and Sokka. Why don't we ever see that fight and see how it plays out? Who defeated who lost to who? Especially given that the Zuko, like, Eska Desna Tonraq fight with the Red Lotus was a bit disappointing earlier on in the season. You really wish they'd gone back and shown that big fight. And it's crazy that we know so few details about that at this point. Other than, once again, it was ordered by Unalaq. Unalaq was the mastermind of it, and Zahir's just the guy who's in charge at the moment. The animation on Ghazan's lava bending, and lava bending in general, is fantastic here, of course. And this is, I think, one of the more memorable parts of Book 3 is just these clear-cut, one-on-one fights. And again, like, we learned so much about Unalaq in this conversation, but, like, so little about, like, Zahir himself. And yeah, like, look, this is the Red Lotus philosophy. Ultimately, it's like freedom from governments and oppressive rulers and stuff like that. But the way they approach it is immediately so like over the top. Korra can't agree with in any way. It's just a fundamental disagreement, and it's a little bit of a stretch to say that she learns to sort of challenge the world leaders because of the Red Lotus when they're so over the top with it of just going out to kill people. And again, it's a lack of thought. Like, look at what happens. What he does in this book allows Kuvira to rise up and causes an even worse situation. That the way he tries to make change isn't great, and chaos works for some people if they're prepared for it, but doesn't work for others. And the example is clearly Mako and Bolin's family. They are just a nice family in all of this, and they suffer greatly because of the chaos, even though they are also sort of hurt by the way the government is run in the like outer ring of the city. It's even worse for them with the chaos, and you have to apply that to more and more people on different levels as it goes on. Again, there's some really cool choreography here in the fight already, and I remember back when this episode first aired, I was kind of immediately sort of called it of like, Mako didn't use lightning, and lightning would be perfect to take down Minghua, since her water always has to fundamentally stem back to her body. So it's the perfect counter to her, which is how they finish that fight in the end. Obviously, this is prior to Bolin getting lava bending, so he's at a clear disadvantage here against Ghazan, and especially with it being like two versus two here. They're really taken by surprise by the specialized skills of these two. So, they lose round 1, but round 2 is a, big victory for the brothers later on in the season. And again, the fact that they have big, clear-cut fights is definitely something to praise. But we know next to nothing about Minghua and Ghazan as characters outside of their abilities. Personality-wise, why are they part of the Red Lotus? We now know what the Red Lotus is, the general idea of what it's about, but why are they involved in such a specific government? How did they come to be that way? Why is Zahir invested in it? We don't even get his proper backstory outside of that he met Unalaq in the past. You do appreciate that they are able to just have a conversation here. It adds some level of depth to it all. But yeah, Korra just calls a philosophical mumbo jumbo. Nothing he said really particularly hit home. She knows who they are now, but this is very different than Amon, Unalaq, and even Kuvira in a way, challenging Korra on her views. That's not really the case here because it's so over the top. And then the reveal, of course, she goes back to her body and she's imprisoned. The entire team has been captured. Mako and Bolin are heading off one place, Asami and Korra are heading off another. And then it's just this shock reveal of like the Earth Queen captured Asami and Korra, which again is pretty good setup for the next episode with the Red Lotus coming into contact with the Earth Queen, and we of course know what happens. And yeah, there's the setup, a trip to Ba Sing Se. So yeah, like I said, it's a good episode in that we finally learn what the Red Lotus is. And it touches on some very interesting ideas, but I think in the end the concept is nothing more than that. They still, to me, all these years later, remain far too much of an enigma for me to really consider them to be like the best villains in Korra. They're cool because they get special powers, they get one-on-one fights, and they get to do these crazy things like kill the queen and so on. But character-wise, we know so little about all of them, in that, like, they even jokingly only state stuff about Ghazan, that like, oh, 2 of these 3 things are correct, lol, and one of them is him growing a beard at a young age, and they don't really say anything about it. Minghua, you kind of learn basically even less about her, and you have to just assume so much of it purely based off the fact that, oh, she doesn't have any arms. That's kind of interesting. She's Water Tribe. Is there a connection to Unalaq? He was Red Lotus. Pali, at least at some point in the season, I think in an episode or two's time, will reveal the whole warlord thing. But once again, everything is just told to us. Nothing is shown. No backstory whatsoever for these characters, really, in terms of depth. And you end up in this weird situation where, even though Zahir gets most of the screen time, you arguably know like almost the least about him, because he's very vague about, like, I met your uncle in the past, and we together we sort of learned about Rava and Vatu. It's just like, okay, but who were you before that? What were you doing prior to that? Like, he's been a non-bender for like the entire series up until we meet him in book 3. What was he up to within the group? Why does he care so much about this? Again, the idea of freedom, I think, is almost like this kind of false thing of like, the group, did they really, like, it's a little bit like hard to get behind the idea that they truly believe in freedom, given the way they approach dealing with it. But for them all individually, they do believe in the idea for a reason, and partly it's because you get the impression that they all have personal issues with previous world leaders. Now that makes sense for Pali. Warlord, that's a position of power. She has issues with that. That's why she would also believe in the philosophy. But what issue did Zahir have with previous world leaders? What issue did Ghazan have? What issues did Minghua have? That's the depth here in terms of not being properly able to invest in these characters in terms of their reasoning behind why they are part of an organization. And the second you make it an organization, it's like, okay, they had to join this thing. The organization has a philosophy that they must agree with to a certain degree, given that Zahir's the leader now. And we talked about that, like Zahir doesn't agree with what Unalaq did with the whole Dark Avatar path. But he agrees with the rest of it. He still agrees with the idea of freeing Vatu and bringing chaos in that sense. Agrees with the idea of taking down world leaders. So, where is the investment from everyone? And while it helps to connect a few dots in terms of like, this group felt that they would be a better influence on the Avatar than the White Lotus, but even that's unexplored, because they literally just say the White Lotus went public and basically are just glorified bodyguards, but they still help to train the Avatar. And this is where we get into the idea of like, we don't know much about the White Lotus in Korra. We really don't know much about the White Lotus itself that much, really, but especially in Korra, it's very vague in that, is Zuko a member? Yes? Question mark. And that's the confusion here. If this is your book where the White Lotus are sort of at their most important, but they just fall out of the story, they just utterly disappear from the story, and I think they only come back right at the end when like Zahir says like, Zuko says, yeah, we've hunted down the rest of the members of the Red Lotus, the other sort of guys, the non-important members that we find out about later. So yeah, it's one of those ones where it's one of the most memorable episodes of Book 3 because we finally learn stuff about our villains. But it's also the episode that highlights that this is the only thing we really learn about them. And it continues to set up the idea of this mystery of like, what are they trying to do with Korra? They don't want to kill her, but they want to capture her. And I've always felt that the reveal that they just want to kill her in the Avatar state falls a little flat, in that I felt there was meant to be almost more of a plot-focused reason behind what they would want to do with her. And it just feels a little blunt when it finally comes out. And so, in the end, the dynamic that we have here is just that Korra won't join us, so we just consider the Avatar another world leader and we'll kill her, because she will oppose us. And it becomes one of the more simplistic villain dynamics of Korra. And that's why, for me, Book 3 has never properly been one of my favorite books, because the main plot, which is always the villains in each book, has fallen a bit short. Now, thankfully, Book 3 has the benefit of also having strong side plots. The Lin and Sue stuff is great. The Return of the Airbenders is great, with the whole like Kai, Jinora, Boomy, Tenzin stuff, and so on. Those side elements that aren't just directly the Red Lotus stuff is where the strength of this book for me is, 100%. But yeah, that's my review, my commentary track for K309 The Stakeout. So in the comments, let me know what other episodes you want to see me do a commentary track for of both Korra and Avatar. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.